Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. Today we're reading The Piece of String by Guy de Maupassant, one of my favorite authors here at Reading with Jimmy. This is a short story translated by Roger Collette, who does all the translations for Maupassant on this website. Remember, if you have a question, readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Let's get started, shall we? Okay, well, let me just adjust this one thing. Hold on a second. Okay. The Piece of String. On all the roads around Gotterville, the peasants and their wives were making their way towards the little town, for it was market day. The men were plodding along, their bodies leaning forward, with every movement of their long bandy legs deformed by hard work and by the pressure of the plow, which also raises the left shoulder and twists the spine, by the spreading of the knees required to obtain a firm stance for reaping, and by all the slow, laborious tasks of country life. Their blue starch smocks, shining as if they were varnished, and decorated with a little pattern in white embroidery on the collar and cuffs, bellied out around their bony frames like balloons ready to fly away, with a head, 2 arms, and 2 feet sticking out of each one. And some were leading a cow or a calf by a rope, while their wives hurried the animal on by whipping its haunches with a leafy branch. The women carried large baskets on their arms from which protruded the heads of chickens or ducks, and they all walked with shorter, brisker step than their husbands, their gaunt, erect figures wrapped in skimpy little shawls pinned across their flat chests, and their heads wrapped in tight-fitting white coifs topped with bonnets. And then a cart went by, drawn by a trot by a small horse, with 2 men sitting side by side, bumping up and down, and a woman at the back holding onto the sides to lessen the jolts. The square in Gotterville was crowded with a confused mass of animals, human beings. The horns of the bullocks, the tall beaver hats of the well-to-do peasants, and the coughs of the peasant women stood out above the throng. Next page. And the high-pitched, shrill, yapping voices made a wild, continuous din, dominated now and then by a great, deep-throated roar of laughter from a jovial countryman, or a long, lowing of a cow tied to the wall of a house. And everywhere was the smell of cow sheds, milk, manure, of hay and sweat, that sharp, unpleasant odor of men and animals which is peculiar to people who work on the land. Maître Hauchecorne of Brotteaux had just arrived in Gotterville, and he was making his way toward the market square when he caught sight of a small piece of string on the ground. Maître Hauchecorne, a thrifty man, like all true Normans, he reflected that anything which might come in success might be useful was worth picking up. And so he bent down, though with some difficulty, for he suffered with rheumatism. He picked up the piece of thin cord and was about to roll it up carefully when he noticed Mr. Maladin, the saddler, standing in his door watching him. They had had a quarrel some time before over a halter, and they had remained on bad terms ever since, both of them being the sort to nurse a grudge. Maître Hauchecorne felt a little shamefaced at being seen by his enemy like this, picking up a bit of string out of the muck. So he hurriedly concealed his find, first under his smock, and then in his trouser pocket, and then he pretended to go on looking for something on the ground which he couldn't find, before continuing on his way to the square, and leaning forward, he was bent double by his rheumatism. He was promptly lost in the noisy, slow-moving crowd, in which everyone was engaged in endless and excited bargaining. The peasants were prodding the cows, walking away, coming back in an agony of indecision, always afraid of being taken in and never daring to make up their minds, watching the vendor's eyes and perpetually trying to spot the man's tricks or the animal's defect. After putting their big baskets down at their feet, the women had taken out their fowls, which now lay on the ground tied by their legs and their eyes terrified and their combs scarlet. They listened to the offers that they were made and either stuck to their price, hard-faced and impassive, or else suddenly, deciding to accept the lower figure offered, they shouted after the customer who was slowly walking away, "All right, Mr. Antime, it's yours, it's yours." And then little by little, the crowd in the square thinned out, and as the Angelus rang for the noon, those who lived too far away to go home disappeared into the various inns. At Jourdain's, which was the main showroom, was crowded with people, eating, with the vast courtyard which was full of vehicles, all sorts of vehicles, carts, gigs, wagons, tilburys, and the indescribable shandydans, yellow with dung, broken down, patched together, raising their shafts up to heaven like arms, a pair of arms, or else heads down and bottoms up. Close to the people sitting at the table, the bright fire blazing in the huge fireplace was scorching the backs of the row on the right, and there were 3 spits that were turning, carrying chickens, pigeons, legs of mutton, and a delicious smell of meat roasting and gravy trickling over the browning flesh rose from the hearth, raising people's spirits and making their mouths water. All of the aristocracy of the plough took its meals at Maître Jourdain's. The innkeeper and horse dealer, he was a cunning rascal who had made his pile. Dishes were brought in, emptied, as were the jugs of yellow cider, and everybody talked about the business that he had done, what he had bought, what he had sold, and news and views were exchanged about the crops. The weather was good for the greens, but rather damp for the wheat. All of a sudden, the roll of a drum sounded in the courtyard in front of the inn, and except for 1 or 2 who showed no interest, everybody jumped up and ran to the door or to the windows with their mouths still full and their napkins in their hands. After finishing his roll on the drum, the town crier made the following pronouncement, speaking in a jerky manner and pausing in the wrong places. Let it be known to the inhabitants of Garterville and, in general, to all persons present at the market, that there was lost this morning on the Bezeville Road between 9 and 10 o'clock a black leather wallet containing 500 francs and some business documents, and anybody finding the same is asked to bring it immediately to the town to the town hall and return it to Maître Fortune of Manorville. There will be a reward of 20 francs. Then the man went away, the dull roll of the drum and the faint voice of the town crier. I'm going to pause 1 second, please. Just 1 second. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Here we go. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody began talking about the incident, estimating Maître Hauchecorne's chances of recovering or not recovering his wallet. And the meal came to an end. They were finishing their coffee when the police sergeant appeared at the door, and he asked, "Is Maître Hauchecorne of Bordeaux here?" Maître Hauchecorne, who was sitting at the far end of a table, replied, "Yes, I'm here." The sergeant went on, "Maître Hauchecorne, will you be good enough to come with me to the town hall? The mayor would like to have a word with you." The peasant, surprised and a little worried, tossed down his glass of brandy, stood up, and even more bent than this morning, for the first few steps after arrest were especially difficult, set off after the sergeant, repeating, Here I am, here I am." The mayor was waiting for him, sitting in an armchair. He was the local notary, a stout, solemn individual, with a penchant for pompous phrases. "Maître Hauchecorne," he said, "you were seen this morning on the Berseville Road picking up a wallet lost by Monsieur Harcon Holoquoy of Manaville." The peasant gazed in astonishment at the mayor, already frightened by this suspicion which had fallen on him, without understanding why. "Me? I picked up a wallet?" "Yes, you." "Honest, I don't know nothing about it." "You were seen." "I were seen? Who seen me?" "Monsieur Maladin, the saddler." And then the old man remembered, and he understood, and he flushed with anger. "So he seen me, did he, the bastard? He seen me pick up this bit of string, Mayor, look!" And rummaging in his pocket, he pulled out the little piece of string. But the mayor shook his head incredulously. "You'll never persuade me, Maître Hauchecorne, that Monsieur Maladin, who is a man who is to be trusted, mistook that piece of string for a wallet." And the peasant angrily raised his hand and spat on the floor as proof of his good faith, repeating, "But it's God's truth, honest it is. Not a word of it is a lie, so help me God." And the mayor went on, "After picking up the object, you even went on hunting about it in the mud for some time to see whether some coin might not have fallen out." The old fellow was almost speechless with fear and indignation. Making up lies like that to damn an honest man, making up lies like that." In spite of his protestations, the mayor did not believe him. He was confronted with Maître Maladin, who repeated and maintained his statement. They hurled insults at each other for an hour. Maître Hauchecorne was searched. At his own request, nothing was found on him. So finally the mayor, not knowing what to think, sent him away, warning him that he was going to report the matter to the public prosecutor and ask for instructions. The news had spread, and as he left the town, the old man was surrounded by people who questioned him with a curiosity which was sometimes serious and sometimes ironical, but in which there was no indignation. He started telling everybody the story about the piece of string, but nobody believed him, and everybody laughed. As he walked along, other people stopped him, and he stopped his acquaintances, repeating the story, repeating his protestations over and over, and showing his pockets, turning them inside out to prove that he had nothing. Everybody said, "Get along with you, you old rascal." And he lost his temper, irritated and angered and upset because nobody would believe him. Not knowing what to do, he simply went on repeating his story. Darkness fell. It was time to go home, so he set off with 3 of his neighbors to whom he pointed out the place where he had picked up the piece of string. And all the way home, he talked of nothing else. In the evening, he took a turn around the village of Berthaud in order to tell everybody his story, and he met with nothing but incredulity. He felt ill all night as a result. The next day, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Marius Pommel, a laborer on Maître Breton's farm in Yamville, returned the wallet and its contents to Maître Holbrook of Manville. The man claimed to have found the object on the road, but, as he could not read, he had taken it home and given it to his employer. The news spread around the neighborhood, and it reached the ears of Maître Hauchecorne. He immediately went out and about repeating his story, and this time, with its sequel, he was triumphant. What really got my goat, he said, wasn't so much the thing itself, if you see what I mean, but the lies. There's nothing worse than being blamed on account of a lie. He talked about his adventure all day. He told his story to people he met on the road, to people drinking in the inn, to people coming out of the church the following Sunday. He stopped total strangers and told it to them. His mind was at rest now. And yet something still bothered him. And without his knowing exactly what it was, people seemed to be amused as they listened to him. They didn't appear to be convinced. He had the impression that remarks were being made behind his back. And so the following Tuesday, he went to the Gotterville market simply because he felt the urge to tell his story. Maladane, standing by his door, burst out laughing when he saw him go by. Why? He accosted a farmer from Croteau who didn't let him finish his story, but gave him a dig in the ribs and shouted at him, "Go on, you old rogue." And then he turned on his heels. Maître Hauchecorne was taken aback, and he felt increasingly uneasy. Well, why had he been called an old rogue? Once he sat down at the table in Jourdain's inn, he started explaining the whole business all over again. And there was a horse dealer from Monterville who called out to him, Get along with you, you old rascal. I know your little game with a bit of string." Hauchecorne stammered, but they found the wallet. The other man retorted, "Get over it, Grandpa. Him as brings a thing back isn't always him that finds it. But mum's the word." The peasant was speechless. At last he understood. He was being accused of getting an accomplice to return the wallet. He tried to protest, but the whole table burst out laughing. He couldn't finish his meal, so he went off in the midst of jeers and laughter. He returned home, ashamed, indignant, choking with anger and embarrassment, all the more upset in that he was quite capable, with his Norman cunning, of doing what he was accused of having done, and even boasting of it as a clever trick. And then he dimly realized that since his duplicity was widely known, it was impossible to prove his innocence. And the injustice of the suspicion cut him to the quick. So then he began telling the story all over again, making it longer every day, adding fresh arguments at every telling, more energetic protestations, more solemn oaths, which he thought out and he prepared in his hours of solitude, for he could not think of nothing else but the incident of the piece of string. The more complicated his defense became, and the more subtle his arguments, the less people believed him. "Them's liars' arguments," people used to say behind his back. And then, realizing what was happening, he ate his heart out, exhausting himself in futile efforts. He started visibly wasting away. The local wags now used to get him to tell the story of the piece of string to amuse themselves, as people get an old soldier to talk about his battles. And his mind, seriously affected, began to give way. Toward the end of December, he took to his bed, and he died early in January. And in the delirium of his death agony, he kept on protesting his innocence, repeating over and over again, a bit of string, a little bit of string, look, Mayor. Here it is. Wow. You've been reading The Piece of String by Guy de Maupassant, and I'd like you to watch the video analysis of this story. Wasn't it great? This guy can tell a story, can't he? Wow. Have you ever been eaten up by something like that? Consumed? It's going to be an interesting analysis. Be sure to visit and read other classics on my website. Reading with Jimmy, Hamlet, we've got Lysistrata, we got To Build a Fire, many, many, many classics. And we're adding more every week. We add more. We're also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, Reading with Jimmy on YouTube. You'll find it. Subscribe to my channel. And remember, if you have questions, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks so much for sharing this story, The Piece of String. Enjoy your day and see you soon.